10 years ago, it was taboo to use your phone at work. Even if you were a desk worker, you just were expected not to use your phone at work. Now you actually need to keep your phone. And there's ways to regulate it, right? There's ways to manage that phone usage so that it can actually benefit an employee and they can get the access they need, save HR a ton of time, save managers a ton of time. AI is much bigger, but it's the same thing where if you, to your point, like if you embrace it and if you look at it for the good that it can create and generate, it can make a meaningful impact on people's lives.
Welcome to Whisking It All with your host, Angela Esposito, co-founder of Whisk.ai, a food and beverage intelligence platform. We're going to be interviewing hospitality professionals around the world to really understand how they do what they do. Welcome to another episode of Whisking It All. We're here today with Rachael Nemeth, founder and CEO of Opus Training. Rachael, thank you for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Of course. Yeah, I'd love to. I always like to start off with the most obvious thing, which is just for people who don't know, what is Opus Training?
It's not the wine. We have to tell people that. I wish we were the beautiful $300 bottle wine. But,
right.
No, Opus is it's a training platform. It's a software that is purpose-built for hospitality businesses. What we do is we've designed training technology that fits into the flow of work, which I know we'll talk a little bit more about, but that's, to keep it simple, that's what we do.
Love it. I love it. Okay. So I always like to understand, number one, what people do, but what got them there or how they got there. So maybe let's kick things off. Can you tell us a bit about your background and kind of what led you to start Opus Training in the first place?
What I always tell people is it's really, like many people in restaurants, a long story for beers, but I'll try to keep it as short as possible. So I worked in restaurants for 13 years. And even preceding that, I came from restaurants. My grandfather owned a barbecue chain in Kansas City in the 60s called Don's World of Beef. It was a competitor with Arby's.
Oh, wow.
Won.
They got the beef. They got the meats,
So they sold roast beef sandwiches and with Don's special relish. So my mom and my aunts and my uncle all worked there. My dad was an English teacher by day, and he worked at Steak and Ale by night, bartending. So I came from this industry, and it was never frowned upon. It was always a way of life. It's always a way to make a living. My mom is still in the food industry, although she switched to dessert. Naturally, I grew up in this industry, but I also grew up, frankly, wanting to get out of this industry like everyone else. Like it's very hard to make a career. It's hard to stand on your feet for 16 hours a day, especially during the holidays or what have you. But I always kind of found my stride in operations. That was where I really loved to work. I waited tables, I cooked, all that stuff. Really preferred cooking over waiting tables, even if it was half the salary. I still remember the conversation with the GM at this long gone little Italian restaurant in Charleston, South Carolina called Bocce's. It's like a tourist trap.
Great.
Having the conversation with the GM that I wanted to work cold apps in the kitchen for $6 an hour. And she looked at me like I was bonkers. And I was so happy after that. Because I was cooking for people.
Right.
Anyway, fast forward to when I moved to New York in 2010. I stayed in the industry really to pay off my college loans and just make a living. And by night, I got my certification to teach English as a second language. That's what I wanted to do, was teach. So stayed in the industry throughout that process to really pay the bills. And ended up working for Danny Meyer at Union Square Hospitality Group. And that was really where I began my first company, which was called ESL Works. what we did is we delivered English as a second language training to employee cell phones. For anyone who's listening, you know exactly what this problem is. I don't have to explain it to you. 35% of frontline workers don't speak English as their first language. There's big communication gaps in the kitchen. And I knew how to teach English. So we started as a services business.
Smart.
And it very quickly, I guess over the course of 2 or 3 years, it evolved into a technology that delivered that training to cell phones.
Wow.
There's a lot of twists and turns from there that got us to Opus, which we can go into. But like, that's really the origin story was me trying to get out and then finding a way back in a really odd way that solved a real problem.
It's like... Yeah, it's like, what is it, like The Godfather, you know? Every time I try to get out, they pull me back in. And out of curiosity, I mean, I got a couple of questions that come to mind, and we'll get more into it. But one is, what made you go to New York? Like, were you going there specifically for something? Or, yeah, I'm curious what kind of...
I mean, why does anyone come to New York? I had this... I thought, I don't know, I just knew I needed to be here. I grew up in Kansas City, and I went to college at the College of Charleston in South Carolina, which is a very small town. And I, like many big pivots in my life, instead of inching my way into it, I just dove in headfirst and took a train up to New York. Who takes a train anymore anyway? I'm not even aging myself. It was like 12 years ago. It's not like there weren't flights, but
yeah, back in my day. Yeah.
So I think it was just the appeal of a bigger city and more people and more diversity. But frankly, like, it wasn't for the restaurants. It wasn't for the work either.
That's what I was like thinking. That's why I was curious. Was it something to do with the hospitality space? It was really kind of just, hey, I got this itch. I want to see if like New York.
I think it was the itch. I also I had never heard of Danny Meyer in my entire life. Like, I didn't know anything about the industry until maybe like the real industry, right?
Right.
Until maybe I was like 5 or 6 years into New York, and Mike Anthony, the executive chef at Gramercy Tavern, who ended up being a mentor to me, was like, you really haven't seen the industry until you've worked for Danny Meyer. And you don't really know what the industry can be and what innovation looks like and what risk looks like until you've worked for Danny Meyer. And he was right. So yeah, I love that you asked that question, because I still have no idea what the heck.
Yeah, sometimes intuition, right? You just kind of like take that leap of faith. Yeah. That's super cool though. And I love how you kind of married what you were doing in terms of, work, like, right? Like, you wanted to be a teacher, and then your background. And so that first kind of version or MVP, which I guess maybe your first, crack at what you're doing today. What happened with that? I'd love to hear the story behind that. So it started off as, like you said, that training being sent to the cell phone for people whose primary, language was not English. And so what did that look like? Like, you started this thing. How did you go about getting customers? Like, I'd love to hear the transition, because sometimes, and it's happened to me personally too, it's like sometimes you pivot many times within the same company, but sometimes it's a couple companies and then you kind of pivot to the newest idea or company where it's like, yeah, if I didn't go through those other two things, I probably wouldn't have landed here. So curious to hear what that journey looked like.
Well, that's exactly it. And I think that's the dirty little secret about entrepreneurship in general, is most of us have built 2 to 3 to 4 companies, and sometimes it's under the same name and sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's under different investors and sometimes it's not, but it's all a process of iterating. It's just like a restaurant too. There's so many different iterations. It's like where you'll see, like, this was at my grandpa's restaurant. He ran for many years Don's Restaurant and Bar. That was like the first full service. And then he, many years later, Don's World of Beef was like the casual dining QSR version. We see this all the time where you're like, how'd you get from that to that?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But it comes with lots of attempts and failures. So training is very hard. Teaching is very hard. So I literally like chose one of the hardest things to work for. And then I switched to another really hard thing to do, which, God help me, I have no idea why I did that. But it gave me a unique perspective on why I wanted to solve this problem really fast and really well, because I was so frustrated. And I think some of the greatest moments of innovation come from pure frustration and fatigue. And so the origin of ESL Works was actually a services business. I hired a league of a dozen teachers, and I basically like shipped them into New York City restaurants between shifts. That's the only time when you can teach ESL, right? It's opening and closing shift coming together, 90-minute classes, all work focused. I stored an easel at all these places. And what I was really running was a logistics business.
Right. Wow.
Telling teachers where to go. And so we had like some of the biggest names in New York City, but it was so hard. And I think it's it's probably like the closest I'll ever get to running a restaurant. So I was like, the margins are terrible.
It's really long hours, open every day. Yeah, you're like,
I was like getting up at 3 to teach a 5 a.m. class at a warehouse in the Bronx. It was wonderful though, because we were really learning so much so quickly. But out of that fatigue came this idea, and frankly, like demand from our customers who were saying, even if you're coming at the most convenient times, you're still missing out on 80% of our workforce that's got second jobs and kids and commutes. And it's funny, how in retrospect, everything always seems like it was much faster than it was. Yeah. I was thinking about this the other day. You've probably been through this. It actually took me with people, with other humans, I think like 18 to 24 months to prototype, to get the right prototype for ESL to employee cell phones. I think we maybe had 15 different MVPs. And it ended up being one Saturday morning. I was sitting really frustrated, ready to give up, honestly. It's like it's like a fairy tale. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to try one last thing. I made a quick video. I just like recorded something on the computer. I think I taught the alphabet. I think that was the first video. I didn't care what I taught. I was like, I need to do something. I made a quiz using Google Forms. And the one thing that I hadn't tried is we had the phone numbers of like 500 employees. And we had all these teacher WhatsApp chats with them, these group chats to tell them about class and send them their homework. So I ended up just using the WhatsApp chat to distribute this video and the quiz, and 86% of them completed it within like an hour. Wow. It was the highest engagement rate I've ever had.
That's insane. That's insane. 86%? That's unheard of. Okay.
It was a small test group, but it was all the validation I needed to start sunsetting the services side to figure out the tech side. So, of course, found engineers, et cetera. But you're probably wondering like how we got from ESL, which is still, there's actually still ESL lessons embedded in the product. It's kind of an natural part, but that's not really the core of what Opus does. We are a multilingual training platform, but what we really do is we deliver micro training to employees. And we couple that with this coaching technology. I know you see this all the time. Managers are some of the hardest people to train to be good trainers. Yeah. They're mostly green, lots of different generations. It's very difficult to get data, lots of tribal knowledge floating around. That's not being recorded, which is why you get bad customer reviews and then it's not solved for 4 months. And a lot of that comes back to managers not responding and not teaching their teams. But I don't blame them, like they're busy as hell. So how we got from this tiny little like niche product to this beautiful training platform was COVID.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you saw this at Whisk too. Like we really saw that the industry was suffering. We thought the industry was dead at that point. So March 2020, I emailed all of our customers. I said, listen, we're going to stop invoicing you. Let us know how we can help. And at that point, I was like, well, had a good run.
I tried, yeah.
Had a really good run. Anyway, what ended up happening is I started to get emails from customers who said, listen, like, we're up and running. We're off premise, but we have people here and they don't know how to wear a mask or wash their hands. They don't know how to handle food properly. And we need to figure out a way to teach them really fast because my training director is working remotely right now, or we had to let her go because we had a riff. And so they needed technology. Very quickly, we pivoted to use the same technology to deliver free COVID safety training to any business in America that wanted it. And at that point, I was like, well, if we're going to go down, let's just go down in flames and do this with helping as many people as we can.
Yeah.
You know, and that was the genuine reaction at that point. The one thing that everyone craved during COVID, if you were fortunate enough to be safe in your apartment or your house, was something to do. And I was like, well, this is something to do and I can help people. But it very quickly, we grew from 0 to 20,000 users in a week.
Wow.
And that was all the validation I needed to know that what we had built was really special and could do a lot more than just teach English. It could actually solve these business problems of accessibility. So that was it. The rest is history. And so easy and perfect. And
no, but it's amazing because it's funny that, and you kind of alluded to it, but sometimes it's like, if you really focus on giving value, which is hard when you don't have your back against the wall, but you know, having your back against the wall and being like, you know what, F it. Like if I'm going, like you said, I'm going down and really giving free value. It's interesting how sometimes that's what you need. And, you know, there's this saying of like, how do you make your free shit better than someone's paid shit? And, you know, like to get good leads in the door and earn that trust. And it's funny because, you know, you, whether on purpose or not on purpose, but, you know, by just kind of going in good faith and being like, you know what, let me help people, you probably gained a lot of trust, learned a lot, built a lot of users, validated, you know, the version 5.0 of the business. I'm sure there was many iterations. So that's super interesting. And I love to hear. So like from that point on, you're now like, okay, 20,000 users, people are watching this COVID training.
What's next?
Was that when you're like, like what, how do I, like, were you thinking like, how do I monetize this now? How do I,
no,
you know,
I mean, sure.
You need engineers.
We were definitely trying to figure out how to monetize it, what made sense. I think the next big problem to solve was, believe it or not, it was accessibility. We were getting people in fast, but we weren't satisfied. It wasn't fast enough. There were so many barriers to entry, especially for technology for frontline workers. And it's a really important thing, especially if you just look at the software space. Everything requires an email. Everything is English only. Everything is mobile responsive and not native mobile, or it's desktop only. And then like the web responsive on mobile is terrible. And so we spent 6 months perfecting the sign-in experience. And I'm not going to say that it's like some big trade secret, like literally anybody could go to the website and like sign in and figure out and see it. But I'm saying that because we nitpicked the flow, and it's one of the first things that people get all sparkly-eyed about Opus is we never ask for an employee email. We ask for their phone number, which is actually better and more accurate for frontline employees. They're changing their phones all the time, so we handle that as well. And the sign-in experience, the first thing we ask you is not what's your name, it's what language do you speak? So the whole UI changes to, you know, Arabic or French or Spanish or what have you, 100 global languages. Wow. And you feel welcome before you even start.
That's cool.
And so that was really like the thing that set us apart so quickly was this emphasis, honestly, on the trainee experience. Historically, what a lot of software companies do, especially if they're building any sort of frontline training solution, scheduling, whatever, they focus on the admin first. And we knew that there were I've heard 1,200, I've heard 1,700 learning. There's a ton. It's a super fragmented learning market.
Right.
But only about 30% of businesses are actually using these platforms because they don't work for restaurants. And so my point in saying all of that is you can't solve the same problem by doing the same thing 1,700 companies have done before you. And so you have to take a step forward and just say, we might fail again at this. Everyone might hate it, but we've got to do what we know works for the end user. And it worked in our favor. After that, it was all about content. We lovingly call it the content problem at Opus. But that first piece was just getting you into the system.
Wow. And at that time, you alluded to, there's a lot of different learning systems. What was the main reason from your point of view that I know some of it's just user experience, but what was the main reason that maybe restaurants weren't adapting these other systems and, yours worked? And I guess a big piece was maybe the sign-in process, but what else would you say kind of contributed to that?
Well, when we talk about how Opus fits into the flow of work, it's designed to be a training companion to your workday. One thing that we never promise restaurants is that we're going to digitize 100% of your training, which is a lot of what you saw in the early aughts.
Yes, it was that's exactly what I was thinking.
Whole thing, get it in.
Yeah, all your SOPs in here. Yeah.
That's fine and dandy, but Google Drive can do that. I don't care about that. So it was really about creating an interactive experience that was in any language that an employee preferred, but coupled it with the stuff that was already happening on the job. No one will ever get rid of in-person training. You shouldn't, because that's the good stuff. A manager's sitting next to somebody and saying, listen, you're chopping that onion the wrong way. It's not how we do it. Here's how you do it. You can't teach that with a video and a quiz. You just can't. And I will go to the, you did a Godfather, I'll go to the mattresses or whatever they say. But that doesn't lead to knowledge retention.
Fair, yeah.
And so, sure, you can get a quick completion checkbox, but how do I make sure that you have coached me properly and that there's a record of that? Well, it's already happening. So what we're doing to solve this problem is capturing all that data while simultaneously getting that manager a tool that said, a lot of these guys are 18 years old, to say, listen, you know how we do this, but you got to make sure that those 5 people know how to do it. How do you greet guests? And so we give them a really beautiful interface that's just for managers and just on mobile for them. We're not going to ask the manager to go to the office. That gives them guidelines that says, listen, here's the 5 things this person needs to know in order to actually be certified in this skill. Rate them 1 to 10 or take a photo or what have you.
Yeah.
And that's led to really incredible success. The reason why restaurants, to answer your question, the reason why restaurants aren't choosing these systems is because it actually is, compared to the legacy systems, it actually is easier to train on paper and just rely on tribal knowledge, because it's very expensive to get all of that training into a platform. So that was the second piece that really, I was alluding to this earlier.
Yeah.
There's nothing harder than creating a training module. It is so hard. It's so taxing. And no one in the industry is an instructional designer by trade. Most of the time they were former operators, and someone was like, you're really good at teaching people. Right. You should do this. Yeah. And honestly, they're the best ones for the job. That was me too. So we have invested heavily in AI in order to help businesses create training either from existing materials and convert them into micro training, or create it from public domain. So they can build custom content 500 times faster than traditional solutions and get it out to market at the speed of their operation, rather than what we hear a lot, which is we have an LTO coming up. We got to plan 6 months in advance because Judy Schmoody has to create the training and do all the classroom stuff, or, we have to let 15 people audit it. It can just be solved in minutes now.
That's awesome. That's super interesting. And I love the idea, obviously, of the multilingual aspect. Like, I guess the first question that comes to mind is, how do you manage that? Like, how did you manage to offer 101 languages, and these days, are you leveraging AI to kind of do that? Because I'm thinking about tools I've seen more on the marketing side and stuff, or sales side, but like being able to maybe do some video and then it can transcribe it or audio it in different languages. And it's not perfect yet, but with any technology, it usually grows pretty exponential. So it's probably not far off from being perfect. Like maybe a couple months, maybe a year. Like, it's probably not a crazy far-fetched idea, but I'd love to hear it from your side. Like, what does that look like, right? Like, especially in places, I live in Miami, so like obviously Spanish is big here, English and Spanish. But when you're in places, or New York, which is super multicultural, you get a bit of everything, maybe even Spanish, English, French, who knows? But how do you go about managing that? Because that's, building a tech company is complex enough. Then building a tech company in the restaurant space, aka me, is hard enough. And then I think you take it a level above. I think we're in like 3 or 4 languages, but you're adding 101 languages. So I'd love to hear a bit about like the strategy and thought behind that and how you manage it.
Well, remember, we came into this with the language experience already. So
right,
we already had this
up.
competitive advantage, and we had this perspective where we said, like, there's no question, this has to be the thing that we invest in. It's ingrained in our mission and our vision. Our mission is to create a world where every frontline worker has a good job. You can't have a good job if you don't understand the thing on the paper that makes you feel welcome. And people say, people are leaving managers, not jobs. That's true too. Your manager doesn't speak your first language. You need some companion to help you with those interactions. So to your point, we automatically translate every interaction in Opus into 100 global languages.
Wow.
Yes, we're leveraging AI for that. On top of that, any video training that you choose to do, which, by the way, training doesn't have to be videos for anyone out there. There's plenty of good training that doesn't have videos, but we do the videos too.
Right.
Auto captions and auto subtitles for you. On top of that, we're supporting text to speech. So the level of accessibility that you can achieve grows, to your point, exponentially when you just multiply the languages from there. We tell restaurants this all the time, but I don't blame them for not having solved it because it's very expensive. If you have 250 employees and 249 of them speak English and 1 speaks Mandarin, you're not compliant and you're not inclusive. But I don't blame restaurants for not translating the employee handbook into to simplified Chinese. So how do we as Opus take on that burden and help you solve that problem? It's with technology. The second piece to that that's really important, you were talking about like AI, it's getting better. I agree, it's getting better. But this is where the language nerd in me is going to come out. Translations are only as good as your inputs. So I'm going to put it as unromantically as possible. If your English sucks, if you're not good at writing, then your translations are going to suck.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
If you're bad at grammar, if you're using tons of idioms, which a ton of restaurants do, that translator will not pick it up for you. And so my advice to anyone, if you're using any translation tools, is be thinking about like the most simple, straightforward English that you can use, and your translations most of the time will get you better than what a human could do.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
it's a good point because I think we all speak in idioms and we all use kind of all kinds of expressions and but when you think about it, it's not easy from a translation point of view because we're always using and especially like across cultures, it's tough. Like I'm thinking of like other languages too. I grew up in Montreal actually, so I speak French too, and I speak Spanish too. And then so like I just think about some things that if you translate word for word make no sense at all. You know, I'm thinking of a funny one now that comes to mind, but it's like at least I think in most of like South America, but at least I could say for sure in Colombia because that's where I've heard it, and my wife's Colombian. But don't basically the translation is like don't give them papaya, which basically means like don't show off so you don't get robbed, like don't wear a Rolex or whatever, like in public, you know. But it's like I'm thinking of translations like that would be so hard to capture.
Well, there's even simpler ones that are so subtle, like take it away, right? Hey, get started. You know, hey Rachel, we're recording the podcast. Take it away.
Yeah, it's so true.
And I think we, if it would be such an interesting exercise if there was some cool technology, we will never do this, but like if they could record someone all day and then like pick out every idiom
and there's a lot.
There's so many, and it's such a core part of English. So I'm not you know, negating that. It's a core part of many languages, not all, but many.
Yeah.
It's about though developing some awareness around that you actually know what parts of your English are confusing or when you're speaking too quickly. And there are very simple ways. We actually developed, so most of the content that people are doing, they're creating themselves with the AI builder. Okay. But we do have off-the-shelf stuff, and we have this module called cross-cultural communication. I preached this all the time at ESL Works. I was like, you do not have to learn Spanish in order to communicate thoughtfully with your team. You can speak slower. You can use better body language. You can understand what other cultures are expecting of body language. And you can slow down and simplify your English.
Interesting.
And people will pick it up. It's not going to be perfect, but like you'll get the point across.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's an interesting way of putting it. And it's funny because I think about like the challenge. Sorry, not the challenges. The number of times I was just, as you're talking about like idioms, I'm thinking about like our regular kind of internal meetings, even at Whisk, like the classic, like, yeah, we'll put that on ice. And yeah, well, like the classic things people say on these online meetings. And I'm like, that'd be a funny exercise. But I swear if I would listen back to all my meetings, I could probably pick out like 20 a day easily of just kind of like,
totally.
Yeah, we'll put that on the back burner, you know, just like whatever it may be. But there's so many of these things anyways. But yeah, so I'd love to hear. So going back to Opus, like, so obviously you guys now have this niche. You're very focused on the frontline worker, which makes sense. You're a real focus on the actual experience, on the multilingual approach. So at this point, like what type of, let's say, restaurant is really up your alley? Because on one hand, I'm imagining groups because you have that like, you know, economies of scale of like training and maybe, but like, I'd love to hear from you. Where did you guys start finding success, and who's your like typical client these days?
I mean, Opus is really designed to solve this business problem of how can I achieve scale with training? And training is expensive. So how do I either save money or make money? So I either need to cut back the training labor, which can sometimes be, you know, depending on how intense your operation is, it's at least 2 shifts for a QSR. We've seen up to 4 weeks for full service restaurants.
Wow.
And so how can you shave back that time, give admins their time back too, so that they can start to be more strategic? And so it's about shaving down that cost and then actually positioning the training in a way that you can start making more money. So what I mean by that is, we were talking about like guest complaints and things earlier, things that like can potentially disrupt your operation. If I get a bad Yelp review, I should be able to turn that into training very quickly so that I can get those customers back and start to increase sales. So a lot of what we're trying to solve for are those pieces, which means that the best customers we have and the best fit for us is a business that is maybe small right now. We call these like emerging brands. So maybe, you know, it's like Kevin Hart's Heart House. We started with them when they had like one location, but they have plans to grow to 25 in the next couple of years. So they have to be investing now. Big Chicken, lots of chicken brands. But those are great examples. We also really love working with really established brands that maybe have been on paper for the last 20, 30, 80 years and need to stay competitive in the market, whether it's the labor market or not. It's hard to keep up these days. The market itself is changing. Consumer behavior is changing. Investor behavior is changing. Franchisee behavior is changing. And paper and versioning becomes very expensive.
Right. That's interesting. And like when you guys think of like onboarding a customer, you know, for our listeners, restaurateurs, owners, you name it, managers, you know, probably this is going through their head. Maybe they've tried something, maybe not, maybe it's on paper. What does the actual, let's say, experience look like of, okay, I'm interested. Opus Training has caught my attention. I guess for a quick plug, you know, where do they go? And what does the process look like from, you know, discovery? They're interested, they land on your website. Maybe just walk them through the typical maybe customer journey.
Most people are going to hear about us through content. We like to educate, we like to teach, we like to be out there in the world, generating ideas and thinking through what's next in the world. So you'll hear about us a lot. But it's really simple to get started with Opus. I'll position it this way, like there's a lot of things that frustrated me with the status quo when I was working in restaurants. And one of them was also that I had to, like, if I was ever signing a contract, I had to spend months sometimes negotiating this thing for, 300 people or users. With Opus, you can get started really small. You can grow from there. Most people want to get started with 1 or 2 locations. That's totally fine. And you can sort of evolve from there if you want to, especially if you're a little nervous about making that switch. We can help you out with that. The journey is quite quick, though, to get from I am excited to like bring my training to life and have it fit to flow to work. You can get a couple of training topics built within a matter of hours. You can collaborate with colleagues immediately if you want to get some feedback. They can do it asynchronously to do course reviews and give you some feedback that way. They can also just get in the content builder with you and build live, much like you would at Google Doc. So we've seen smaller businesses get up and running in a matter of 2 days. Their whole front line, it's reached them. But some people like to take it slow. So they might say, I'm just going to focus on just my guest-facing employees to start, and then we'll do back of house next. The third way that we see people start, this is actually interesting. It's much more common these days, compliance training. It's a big focus for restaurants these days with Fair Work Week and joint employer and all of these laws on top of sexual harassment prevention and food handlers. So we have a whole arm of the business where you don't even have to create content. We can just help keep you compliant on all the state laws.
That's interesting.
Same day. Like we've seen businesses that unfortunately, something happened, there was a claim, and they did train their team, but they trained their team maybe with a platform that didn't resonate. So they had a couple of people that didn't do it. The finest example is the anti-harassment training with like the man and the woman in the office. And like, what restaurant employee is ever going to resonate with that? So that's kind of those are like the 3 ways that someone can get up and running, is just like choosing a plan that's nice and simple for them and their finances, choosing something that maybe starts with a segment of your workforce if you'd like to, or maybe a couple of locations, or starting with like the compliance only.
And I guess for people that, that are listening, just a quick plug. So it's opus.so, right?
It's opus.so.
Perfect. Cool. So for those listening, opus.so, and I noticed you even have a free trial. So I was assuming it was a demo. Okay. That's awesome. No, because in my head I was thinking maybe a demo or something, but it sounds like it's pretty easy. So, and sounds like you guys have a good user experience. So yeah, for those listening, if this piques your curiosity, if it's a problem that you've been facing, a pain point you're facing, just literally opus.so, sign up for the free trial and try it out. But super interesting. And then on your side, just to get, into like, from idea to serious pain point you want to solve, I'd love to see how it pivoted from that first kind of version to where it is today. What's kind of next for you? Like, and I say next, maybe like, what's obviously just growth and getting more customers, and every entrepreneur wants that. But outside of just, growing and getting more brands, like what type of things do you see next for Opus?
It's a long road to completely change the world of work. There's a lot, it's very broken and it's not just as simple as, pay. I've been on the employer side too. That's hard. And it's hard to afford it. So we have a long journey ahead of us, but we fundamentally believe that training is the golden thread through all of it that can really solve some big problems with frontline work, and namely the restaurant industry. So, in the immediate future, we're very excited and committed. Obviously I'm biased, but like to the restaurant and hospitality industry. So we're here and there's a lot of work to do. We're also very committed to training. We've only just begun, to be honest. And so it's important to us that, and me as a business owner, like we keep our team laser focused on that training problem to solve, and we plan to be there for a while. So as far as like the innovation side is concerned, we're continuing to invest heavily in AI. I know you're probably hearing this from everyone right now, but
it makes sense. Yeah.
We did years ago when we started with translation technology. We did a year ago when LLMs started becoming more publicly available, and they're getting better and better and better, so much faster than you would ever expect, and in really good ways. I was talking to Kristen Hawley about this at Expedite.
Yeah.
Like,
we had her on not too long ago.
Yeah. And she was like, everyone's so pessimistic about AI and you're so optimistic. Why are you so optimistic about AI? And listen, like there are a lot of regulatory conversations happening right now, and we'll see where those lead. But if you use AI intentionally and if you use it to solve the right problems, it can really help businesses and their teams significantly. And so you can expect a lot of really cool stuff the next year centered on that technology.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm with you there. Like, honestly, the way I see it when it comes to AI is like, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, but I don't have enough power to stop AI. That's like, either I'm going to, see how I can use it for good, or you can just lock yourself in a room and be fearful. But like being fearful won't change anything. So like for me, it's just a matter of like, hey, it's possible. There are a lot of serious potential negative outcomes, but like I can't really do anything. So might as well look at the positive outcomes. How can I help in my personal life, in my business life? How can it make my employees' lives easier? How can they leverage tech to maybe focus on more creative tech? Like, how can we help our restaurateur clients? So I'm with you there. It's like, I'm optimistic about it too, because it's like the alternative is what? Just waiting and locking yourself in a room. Not using
it, yeah. It's a little apples and oranges, but I'll try to like thread the needle on this. It's kind of like 10 years ago, it was taboo to use your phone at work. Even if you were a desk worker, you just were expected not to use your phone at work. And we saw this seismic shift in culture, especially in restaurants, that now you actually need to keep your phone. And there's ways to regulate it, right? There's ways to manage that phone usage so that it can actually benefit an employee and they can get the access they need, save HR a ton of time, save managers a ton of time. And AI is much bigger,
yeah.
But it's the same thing where if you, to your point, like if you embrace it and if you look at it for the good that it can create and generate, it can make a meaningful impact on people's lives.
Yeah, I love that. Well said. This is great, by the way. So again, for those just kind of tuning in or listening or need a reminder, Opus training platform, opus.so. They got a free trial. It sounds like a no-brainer. Try it out if it works for you. 101 languages. But for to just kind of wrap up this episode, I'd love to leave you with or ask you any kind of last words, anything you want to share when it comes to the restaurant industry, or maybe to folks listening that are thinking about a training tool or maybe using an alternate training tool or are still on pen and paper. Anything you want to share?
If you are training your team, then you're doing something right. So like just taking the step to be intentional about training in whatever capacity, whether you choose to use a platform or not, is the right move. It means that you're investing in your people. Everyone has their own time in their business, and when they're ready to scale and they're ready to take that leap into a training platform, and it can be really scary. But if you're already doing it, it's really just about enhancement, not replacement. And I think that's the important message here. Is it's kind of like the big step from cash registers to POS. And, I was in the age of like Squirrel. I didn't even know what Toast was when I was a server. I wasn't even around. And like paper receipts. POS didn't seek to like completely replace these systems. It was there to help enhance those systems. And I think that's the best way to think about a training platform. It's just the next evolution of what's already naturally happening at work.
I love it. Well, you heard it here first. Rachael Nemeth, founder of Opus.so, Opus Training. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, sharing your journey, and it was a pleasure to have you on the Whisking It All podcast.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Awesome.
Feel free to check out Whisk.ai for more resources and schedule a demo with one of our product specialists to see if it's a fit for you.